back to my channel, everyone. My name is Peace. I am a clinical mental health counselor and an immigration advocate. So typically, I cover videos on immigration and racial trauma, and I also like to do psychoeducation video for the general public knowledge as well. Today's video is back to immigration and racial trauma. Like I promised you guys in the first video that I cover a title Forced Migration, I told you guys the next video would be on immigration and identity. And that's exactly what I want to talk about today, okay? Good tea. Okay, so like I said, immigration and identity is the first topic I want to cover since the forced migration video. Now, for immigration identity, I want to focus on stage 4 of migration, which is trauma while in the host country. And I'm going to be covering, I want to cover 4 different topics, 3 to 4. The first one is linguistic identity or linguistic discrimination. For that, I want to cover native tongue versus accent. I want to cover career identity for immigrants, which is being business owner back home or a family owned business, whereas out here, when they migrate here, they tend to be more of a 401k employee or W-2 employee. I want to cover also our values identity. Back home, immigrants, sub-Saharan immigrants tend to be collectivist culture, whereas here in the US has an individualistic identity that immigrants have to adjust to, all right? Let's just get right into it because the topic matter is very, very heavy and I have a lot of research that I want to make sure I touch on just a tad bit before I go even deeper for the next video. So the first session is linguistic identity, but before I get into that, I want to emphasize that my clients and the population I do work with, it's sub-Saharan African. Sub-Saharan as in Africans who are from Congo, who are from Somalia, Sudan, South Sudanese. I want to cover Rwandans, Liberians. I am actually missing Sierra Leoneans. There's a lot of Sierra Leoneans who are down here in Fargo as well, and Burundis. I'm missing a few in between, but those are all sub-Saharan immigrants. I just want to go over like where we're all migrating in the U.S. Okay, just to give you guys an understanding of like these immigrants and why there's such conflict within their identity back home and what they have here in the US. So, according to the US Census, as of 2015 to 2019, Texas hosts the largest population of sub Saharan Africans. They have about 12% of sub Saharan Africans, followed by New York, that has about 8% of sub Saharan Africans. Maryland has about 12%, has about 8% sub Saharan Africans. California has about 7% sub Saharan Africans. And then Minnesota in the Midwest has about 6% of us sub Saharan Africans living up here in the Midwest. And these Africans coming down here are due to forced migration, fleeing civil war, and fleeing some type of internal conflict in their homeland that's causing them to seek out asylum, like I mentioned in stage 3 of forced migration. So the first barrier that immigrants face while in the U.S. tend to be linguistic barrier. So I want to talk about the difference between our native tongue and being perceived as individuals with accent, because that's such a new concept to immigrants when they migrate down here, okay? Linguistic discrimination is defined as an unfair treatment of people which is based on the use of language and characteristics of their speech. This includes first language, their accent, and the perceived size of their vocabulary due to their native tongue and their accent. Immigrants who've migrated down here from the US, migrated down here to the US, face a lot of discrimination. Even if they're qualified for certain work, they won't get it due to linguistic barrier. And I just want to go over like a certain research that North Carolina recently done. They did it so recently in November. I just want to read a little bit of this research. They did it for Swahili speakers, Hmongs, and Spanish speaker. Again, I'm going to cover sub-Saharan Africans, so mainly the Swahili speakers, okay? And I'm just going to read directly what the outcome was, okay? So this is according to WFAE, that is Charlotte, North Carolina public station, and they do a lot of like newscasting. It states the participants in this study were all newly arrived refugees from the Democratic Republic of Congo. They lived in the United States between 2 months to 4 years. The researcher Bernstein explained that their situation varied from that of many other immigrant groups. Theirs varied a lot, okay? So refugees are especially provided assistance to enroll for safety net programs when they're settled into the US. According to Bernstein, they get assistance early on their arrival, but they may drop off from those assistance programs due to facing barrier while staying enrolled. What they found out is these sub-Saharan immigrants, these immigrants from the Democratic of Congo who are living in Charlotte, North Carolina, when they migrated to Charlotte, they tend to have caseworkers that will enroll them in all these SNAP programs, food stamp, SNAP benefits, EBT. They'll enroll them in Medicaid, all the stuff low-income immigrants tend to be enrolled in. My family went through the same thing. We got all of the housing, food stamp, SNAP, but within 6 months, you're supposed to go and fill out new paperwork confirming your need for these programs, right? The thing with these Swahili speaking immigrants, is all of the documents that were sent to the house for re-enrollment was in English and Spanish. None was translated into Swahili for them to understand that they actually need to apply or go in for an interview. So because they did not know of their rights, because everything was written in English or Spanish, none of them reapplied for it. Thus, some of them got kicked out of their home, some of them got kicked out of their programs, and they actually had to seek out help from legal team to help them get reinstated back into those what is considered safety net programs. Okay, so if I just want to use this example of what linguistic barriers can do to immigrants when they are not getting the help they need, making sure that they have some caseworker that stays on with them long term, and also a clinical mental health counselor that speaks their language, that helps them get the work they work get the resources they need. Us as clinical mental health counselors, we don't just provide psychoeducation. We actually are advocates for the clients we work with. We do just as much paperwork as caseworkers. We do just as much referring, and we also merge the caseworker with their doctors, with the immigrants, with other providers in the community. That's why this case is just a good example of how much immigrants need clinical mental health counselor on board with them that speak their language and that can assist them in making sure they stay into these early intervention programs. All right. Okay. Now let me just continue speaking on sub-Saharan immigrants and other barriers. Okay. Like I mentioned, the first thing I wanted to cover was linguistic identity, that native tongue versus the accent. So North Carolina was just one of those examples of how important it is that immigrants are being given resources that is actually in their native tongue and not just left to the wolves to figure things out for themselves. Okay, that's the first one, linguistic identity, which is your native tongue versus being someone perceived with accent. And this ties into the second identity, is so crucial, which is career identity. Okay, immigrants back home tend to be more of business owners. They run family business, whether it's something as simple as fishing or hunting or gardening or just selling food in the market. We all tend to be more business owners than employees. So when you come to the US and you have to actually get enrolled into some type of workforce, that's all a new language for them, a whole new concept, waiting 2 weeks to get a paycheck to provide for your kids. Back home, my mom sold almost everything. I shouldn't put my mom even sold cow blood, but she was able to make money that day to feed us that day. Whereas in America, when she got her first job, she had to wait 2 weeks to get a pay, and she actually had to provide transportation, food, means of getting means of actually getting the clothing she needs for work, all for herself first before she can even start working to make money. It usually takes about 2 to 3 weeks before you get your first paycheck, and that causes a lot of stress for those immigrant parents because they're not just providing for them and their kids at home. Most immigrants are providing for the family that left back home as well. Okay, so business owner versus an employee identity. Here's another thing that's very important when it comes to immigrants' identity. We are very high in education. We have a high rate of education. So, according to the US Census, again, compared to total US immigrant population, sub Saharan Africans are better educated, participates in labor force at a higher rate, and are more likely to speak English at home. Yet, yet they also have lower average income and experience poverty at a higher rate than foreign-born population overall. So even though us sub-Saharan immigrants have high education rate, we experience the highest poverty rate. And I'm going to talk about why that is. A lot of it is because we're racialized as black. I'll go into it when it comes to our racialized identity. Okay? So in 2019, about 42% of sub-Saharan African ages 25 and up they had a bachelor degree or higher. So about 42% of us sub-Saharan immigrant Africans, we have a bachelor degree or higher. That's impressive, right? That's extremely impressive. Yet, approximately 17% of us sub-Saharan African immigrants are facing some form of poverty. We live in an impoverished lifestyle. And what the US Census define as poverty is earning less than $25,000 feeding a family of four, and this is in 2019. So about 17% of us sub-Saharan immigrant African only earn about $25,000 or less for a family of four, and that's below poverty line for this climate. So as I'm saying, though 42% of us actually have a higher education, 17% of us live in poverty. That's insane. That's overwhelming. That's extremely overwhelming. And again, like they said, majority of the origin groups of these who are living in poverty, the highest among them are Somali, which is about 37% of Somalis are in poverty, and the lowest among them are Cameroonian and Liberians. I found that data extremely I didn't find that data believable at first until I actually took a time to reflect over why that is. Okay, so if 37% of Somalis living poverty, it makes sense to me because a lot of Somalis live in Minneapolis, and Somalis came in Minneapolis like as early as the 70s, right? And they lived in the St. Paul area. What happened around that time was Minnesota created a new bill that helped. They wanted to build a highway through Minnesota all the way to North Dakota, I-94. And they chose to build that I-94 highway that we all travel on directly in between the Somalian neighborhood. So if you go to Augsburg, Town, if anybody who's watching this from is from the Midwest, if that I-94 you're driving through in Minneapolis and St. Paul, that's where the Somalian neighborhood used to be, and they split it in half, and that caused a lot of adversary for Somalians because they had to rebuild their community all over again. I went to my undergrad at Augsburg University right there in what they call Little Somalia, and I see the disparity between them. Even though they're trying the hardest to create something out of nothing for their community, I-94 being in the middle of their community really has set them back because Somalis have businesses there. All of the kids are enrolled in school. Somalis actually do a great job of advocating for themselves. They do such a good job of being informed when it comes to policies that I'm very shocked that they will have such a high such a high poverty rate. And again, I thought Liberians will have a higher poverty rate, but Liberian poverty rate only sits at 9%. And what that informs me is the Liberians, we are actually centered in Minnesota in Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center, and a lot of Liberians are in Iowa, North Dakota. And because we're centered that a little bit more north, there's more access to higher earning jobs. Okay, a lot of Liberians down here are CNA, they work as nurses, and those pay a little bit better off, and that's why our poverty rate is low. Because Liberians actually have lower, lower higher education rate than Somalians, though it's a little bit closer to each other. Liberians tend to have the lowest higher education rate. So I was very, very shocked to understand that Liberians will have such a low poverty rate because I thought we had the highest poverty rate, but it makes sense because we're being paying higher wages. Another reason why Liberians have a higher wage than Somalis, doing the research, is because of linguistic barriers. Liberians are Black Americans who migrated back home after slavery, so their English is their first language. So we tend to get higher more, and there'd be less discrimination because of the way we carry ourselves. We seem more Americanized. The other sub-Saharan Africans like Somalians and other East Africans. So I see again how politics play into why Liberians tend to have more of an upper hand in 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 getting access to work and getting access to higher paid jobs than my East African brothers and sisters who might have a higher education, but the linguistic barrier is way higher for them, especially those who are Swahili speakers and those who are Arabic speakers. There tend to be way more racial discrimination from linguistic discrimination for them than us Liberians because we have English as our first language. We have an accent, but our accent is a little bit more understandable, thus giving more of a upper hand. And that's something we have to be very mindful of when we're speaking on this stuff because linguistic discrimination affects all of us. We might think we're better off, but we actually are not. We're not at all. If our brothers and sisters from Somalia are getting mistreated, we need to actually speak up on that. It's not fair. Okay? I just really want to cover and emphasize why our identity when it comes to career is so skewed. Because back home, immigrants, our identity is rooted, our work identity is rooted in being a family owned business. Our work identity is rooted in the trade we learned that's passed down from family. My grandma was a cook. She ran her own restaurant. All of her 9 daughters are amazing cooks is rooted in trade. Even here in America, my grandma still cooks and sells food. She taught me how to do the same. So I've always had that skill. Early on, I was able to start selling food when I came here because a lot of our trade are rooted in generations passing down. Whereas in America, a lot of the trades, though for some, it's still rooted in family. We're more individualistic, so is our sense of work is rooted in going to school and being more individualistic. Now, this takes me down to the third identity I wanted to cover, which is family and racial identity. Okay? What I really mean by this is for immigrants back home, our identity is rooted in the origin of our tribe. Okay? Our identity is not rooted in the color of our skin, our identity is rooted in the origin of our tribe. So for me, back home, I was a Geo girl from Liberia. My family lived in Morovia, but I was a Geo woman. My grandma speaks Geo, that's her tribal language. Our tribal food is GB. My mom and grandma cooks the best GB, the best GB that will make you cry, because that's what our culture is rooted in, right? Whereas in America, when we migrated here, our identity is rooted in the color of our skin. Instead of me being a Geo woman who speaks Geo and EGB, I'm now a black woman first. And that leaves a lot of identity confusion because at home, our parents want us to speak our native tongue. They want us to still eat fufu. But then in school, you don't want to go to school smelling like fufu because people don't even know that you're African. They just see you as black. And that causes a lot of confusion. A little anecdote here. When I was in the fourth grade, I did not know that black people was slavery was a thing in Africa. It was in the fourth grade. My teacher played Martin Luther King video, and in that classroom, I was like one of the only black people in the classroom, and I was just watching black people being treated so poorly. I remember crying so viscerally because I never understood that for the color of our skin in history, my people in America have been treated worse off than what I've seen in Africa back home. Because mind you, as a kid back home, all I dream about was coming to America because America is the land of the free. In America, people on TV, everybody's happy. And then you come here and you actually find out people that share your skin are on the bottom of the caste system. Therefore, you're not even an African woman. You are a black woman. And black woman comes with a lot of internalized definition that we have to learn over time. So that identity is very mixed. And I can say the same for those who come from Sudan. They're able to split apart and be South Sudanese, and they have specific culture. Like all of my South Sudanese friends here, even when I say it wrong, they will correct me and say, no, I'm Dika, no, I'm Nor. Like they're so rooted in their tribal identity, but yet they're just perceived by the color of their skin. And because they have a beautiful darker pigment, that's all they're naturally seen as. Whereas in all of Sudan, there's so many different variation of the pigment that you actually have to get to know them personally to see, oh, that person is actually not Dinka due to certain features they have. They're actually Noir. So that's something that is very important for those who are not aware of immigrants and like the different variations. We see ourselves more as tribal than we see ourselves as our racialized self that the U.S. Census counts us as first. Personally, it's more tribal, and our parents are very honed in on us keeping our tribe and our tradition. Which I want to go to the second part of the family and racial identity is our collectivist culture as immigrants versus the individualistic culture that American upholds. In America, by the time you turn 18, you can literally say whatever you want to your parents, talk to them whatever you want, and dip and go to college. For immigrants, for sub-Saharan African immigrants, if you want to die, then you'll talk crazy to your parents. And I say it jokingly, but like for real, it's so important that us immigrants we stick together because we're raised on this concept that it takes a village to bring a child together. It takes a village to get things done. So we're raised on making sure that our parents are honored. We're raised on making sure whatever decisions we make, it honors and glorifies our ancestors, our parents, our aunts and uncles. We make decisions for everyone in mind, not just yourself. So when you're in the US and you're going to school and your friends just want you to not ask your parents for permission before you go and do stuff or go to a sleepover, it's like, no, no. You ask your parents to bless whatever decisions you make because that's important. Now, war has caused a lot of conflict internally, intergenerational conflict, but that's still a value most sub Saharan African uphold. We uphold that collectivist culture. That's what a lot of sub Saharan Africans live in communities similar to what they have back home. Like I mentioned, Somalis are all in Deacon Town, they're all in Minneapolis, in the center of Minneapolis. Even though they try to destroy the community with I-94, they're still extremely tight knit. I lived there for a few years and I saw it myself. Same with Liberians. They're all in Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center. Same with the Chinese. They're all there. And here too in Fargo, we have little groups. We have a Burundi and Rwanda tribe that have moved down here that they have been able to come together and create some form of correlation for themselves and their kids. With Liberians, we have Sudanese correlation going on. It is very important to us immigrants that our people were being taken care of for each other by each other. So that collectivist culture is extremely important. I know when I went to undergrad in the cities, two of my roommates were white and they were always like hound me on why I want to go home every weekend to spend time with my grandma and my aunties because I moved in the cities to get to know my aunties and my grandma more, right? So every Saturday it's like, are you gonna go home again, peace? And it's like, yeah, I moved here to get to know them. And they were always confused why I would spend weekends on family. Because in America, their culture, they see their family only around Thanksgiving and Christmas. So they tend to be so anxious for the holidays because they have to see their parents. They only call their parents for money. Whereas for me, it was really, really important for me to learn values from my auntie and how they've been growing up. So I actually saw it as a gem to live in the same town as them and go to each of their homes and like try out their food, their cooking, and just spend time with them. It really helped me grow as a young lady to see how all of my aunts move and certain values they have that I want to uphold. So it was just really interesting seeing the difference in college. Like I had to hide from my friends. Like I had to hide from my American friends so much so I could just tell that they didn't value that collectivist culture as much as I did. They wanted me to be more individualistic like them, but I just didn't find it beneficial. Okay. Hopefully, hopefully everything I cover right now, you guys found it very insightful. But I just want to go over some of the research in why our identity is so skewed as immigrants, because we have one identity back home that we hold near and dear to our hearts. Due to forced migration, we come to the US, we have to assimilate into different identity, some of which is very traumatizing, especially being racialized as black instead of your own cultural, tribal identity that you've been living. You're racialized as black, and that's very traumatic. So one of the next few videos I'm gonna create again, I will take a break because these are very heavy subject matter. But when I do speak on immigration and racial trauma, I just want to speak on the racial aspect of it. I'm going to use the racial healing model just to speak more on how important it is to actually heal. As I was mentioning, I will either cover the racial healing model next when it comes to immigration identity, or I actually want to go a little bit more micro, which is shame based parenting when it comes to the collectivist culture, like I just mentioned. Because there are some good to having a collectivist culture, but there's also some negative aspect of living in a collectivist culture, which is shame based parenting and shame based teaching as a whole. All right. That's all for today's video. I want to keep it a little bit more short. So if you made it this far, please comment an elephant down below. If you're not someone who wants to like comment anything personal, leave an elephant down below so I know you made it all the way to the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. As always, stay prayed up. Stay prayed up. Pray for your family, your friends, your co-worker, your loved one, okay? Just stay prayed up. All right, y'all. Peace out. Take care of yourself.